The paper sat on my kitchen table for 3 days before I signed it. My son had left it there after Sunday dinner, sliding it across the tablecloth with the same casual confidence he used for everything the way he'd always moved through the world, like doors opened for him before he even reached them. "It's just a formality, Mom," he'd said, already reaching for his jacket. "The financial advisor needs it to restructure your accounts. Better returns. You'll thank me later." I looked at it again that Monday morning, coffee in hand, morning light coming through the window above the sink. 41 years of nursing had taught me one thing above everything else. When something feels slightly wrong, and you can't explain why, trust that feeling. I'd learned it holding a patient's chart at 2 in the morning, reading numbers that looked fine on the surface but carried something underneath them, some quiet wrongness that the instruments hadn't caught yet. The paper looked fine on the surface. I signed it anyway. That was my mistake. My name is Margaret, and I turned 71 last April. I retired 8 years ago after spending most of my adult life as a charge nurse in the cardiac unit at Street Benedictine Medical Center in Columbus. 33 years. I'd held the hands of people dying and people recovering, and I'd learned the difference between the two faster than most people learn to drive. My husband, Robert, passed 4 years ago quietly, the way he'd lived, in his favorite chair with a book open in his lap. He was 68. We had 37 years together, and I won't pretend the years since have been anything other than what they are. My son, David, is 44. My daughter, Claire, lives in Portland with her husband and my 2 grandchildren. Claire calls every Sunday at 7. David lives 20 minutes away and visits when he needs something, though I didn't understand that fully until this past year. I live in the house Robert and I bought in 1989. 3 bedrooms, a porch that wraps around the east side, a garden I've kept going through every season because the tomatoes Robert planted the year we moved in still come back if I tend the soil right. The house is paid off. It's worth considerably more now than what we paid for it. I didn't think much about that. I suppose I should have. David started coming around more often after Robert died. He'd bring his wife, Sandra, and they'd stay for dinner. And Sandra would clear the plates without being asked and call me by a new name she'd invented. Mom M. I remember thinking how warm that was, how thoughtful. Grief makes you want so badly to believe people are good. The changes were so gradual that I only understood them looking backward, the way you understand a storm, by the wreckage it leaves, rather than the clouds that carried it. First, David suggested I let him handle my investment accounts. Robert had always managed those, and I admitted to David that the statements confused me. He set up online access for himself and started sending me quarterly summaries in emails I read, but didn't study carefully. I was busy. I was volunteering 3 days a week at the clinic downtown, teaching a memoir writing class at the senior center on Thursdays, tending my garden. I trusted my son the way you trust the floor under your feet without thinking about it, because you've never had reason to think about it. Then came the suggestion about the car. Mine was 7 years old and ran perfectly well, but David said the roads weren't safe for someone my age during winter, and perhaps I should consider selling it and letting him drive me when I needed to go places. I laughed and said no. He smiled the way people smile when they're filing something away for later. Sandra started accompanying David on visits more often, and she had a quality I slowly began to recognize from my years in the hospital. She was always observing. Not engaged, observing. Taking inventory. She'd walk through the main rooms with a glass of wine in her hand, and her eyes moving across the furniture, the artwork, the shelves of books Robert had collected. I thought she was simply curious. People in hospital beds have that same expression sometimes, sizing up a room they haven't decided if they want to stay in. Last November, David mentioned a financial advisor for the second time. This one was different from the quarterly summaries conversation, more specific. There were accounts, he explained, that weren't optimized. Money sitting in low-yield instruments. He had a contact, someone he trusted who specialized in restructuring estates for seniors. He used that word. Estates. Not savings. Not accounts. Estates. I said I'd think about it. 3 Sundays later, the paper appeared on my table. I signed it because I was tired that evening and distracted, and because it was my son standing there. Because for 44 years, David had been the child who called me mom and whom I'd rocked through fevers and driven to school and watched graduate and loved with the kind of love that doesn't audit itself, doesn't double-check, doesn't demand proof of good intentions. 2 weeks after I signed, I started noticing things. It was a Tuesday in December when I opened my paper bank statement. I still got paper ones. Always had. Old habit, and saw a transfer I didn't recognize. $14,000, moved to an account number I didn't know, under a transfer authorization I apparently had signed. Apparently, I sat down at the kitchen table and looked at that number for a long time. Then I got up, went to the filing cabinet in the study, Robert's old filing cabinet, organized by year and category with color-coded tabs because Robert had been that kind of man, and I pulled out every financial document I had from the last 14 months. I spread them across the dining room table. I got a legal pad. I got a pencil. I had not worked in cardiac for 3 decades without knowing how to read data, how to find the line that doesn't match the others. It took me 4 hours. By the end, I had filled 6 pages of the legal pad. The paper David had left on my table was not a simple account restructuring form. It was a durable financial power of attorney. I had signed over the authority to manage my finances, all of them to my son. And in the 14 months prior, $17,000 had left my accounts in transfers. I had no memory of authorizing, going to 2 different accounts I didn't recognize. I closed the legal pad. I sat in the quiet of the dining room for a long time. I thought about calling David. I thought about calling Claire. Then I thought about what 33 years in a hospital had taught me about what you do when a patient deteriorates. You do not announce the emergency before you know what you're dealing with. You gather information. You stay calm. You make a plan. I did not call David. I did not call Claire. Not yet. I called an attorney the next morning. Her name was Patricia, and a friend from the senior center had mentioned her once an estate and elder law specialist, Sharp, someone you called when something serious was happening. I got her on the phone after one transfer from a receptionist, explained what I'd found, and she said, "Can you come in this week?" I drove myself. In my 7-year-old car, which still ran perfectly fine. Patricia had an office on the 4th floor of a building downtown, and she was younger than I expected, early 50s, silver-streaked hair, reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She reviewed the documents I brought. She was quiet for a long time, in the way that good diagnosticians are quiet not because they don't know what they're seeing, but because they're being careful before they speak. "This power of attorney is valid," she said finally. "You signed it, but these transfers," she tapped the bank records, "these are unauthorized. A financial POA grants the authority to act on your behalf. It does not grant the right to transfer funds to the agent's personal accounts or to accounts with no documented purpose. This is misappropriation of funds. In Ohio, it may constitute elder financial abuse under state statute." I said, "What are my options?" She looked at me over her reading glasses. "You have more than you think." We talked for 2 hours. I took notes. When I left her office, I had a legal pad full of next steps and the first clear feeling I'd had in months. Not anger. I'll come back to the anger, but clarity. Nurses know clarity. It's the moment the fog burns off and you can see exactly what you're working with. I had one more thing to do before I moved forward. I needed to know how far this went. I did something I'm not entirely proud of, though I've made my peace with it. I called David the next Sunday and told him I was having some memory troubles. I said it carefully, in the way I'd heard frightened patients say it hesitatingly, embarrassed, reaching for words. I told him that I'd been confused about some bills, that I wasn't sure I understood some of the financial statements he'd been sending, that I was worried I might not be as sharp as I used to be. I heard the shift in his voice. Something loosened in it. Something that had been carefully held became suddenly easier. He came over that Thursday with Sandra. They sat across from me at the kitchen table, that same table, and David had a folder. Inside the folder were more documents, a revised version of the power of attorney, broader in scope, a form that would allow him to make medical decisions on my behalf, and a letter, which he placed in front of me last, from a real estate attorney whose name I didn't recognize, outlining a process by which the house, this house, Robert's house, with the tomatoes and the wraparound porch, could be transferred into a family trust, managed by David. Sandra watched me read it. She had her hands folded on the table, and she was very still, and her eyes had the expression I now recognized completely. Inventory. This was assessment. This was final accounting. David said, "It's really the smart move, Mom M. The house is a significant asset. And if it's in a trust, you're protected from estate taxes, and we can make sure it goes to the right people." I looked at him. I looked at Sandra. I took a slow breath. "I'd like to think about it," I said. "Can I keep these?" David hesitated for just a moment, 1/2 second, barely anything, and then smiled. "Of course." That evening I called Claire. "I want to tell you about this conversation because it matters. People always ask in these situations, why didn't you tell someone sooner? And the answer is always the same. Even though it feels like it should be more complicated, you don't tell someone sooner because telling makes it real. Telling means your son, the child you raised, the one who knew his multiplication tables by 2nd grade, and who used to fall asleep on your shoulder on long car rides, and who you watched become a man, has been systematically stealing from you. And you are not ready to know that until you've already proven it to yourself 6 times over and there's no other explanation left. Claire answered on the second ring. I told her everything. All of it, in order, the way I'd been taught to give report at shift change. Facts first, assessment second, plan third. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mom, I'm flying out. Saturday." "You don't have to." "Mom." She was there Saturday. The next 4 weeks were the most deliberate of my life. Patricia had outlined a clear path, and Claire and I followed it step by step. We revoked the power of attorney. I had the right to do so in writing, and Patricia filed it immediately. We opened new accounts at a different bank, in my name only, and transferred my funds. We documented every unauthorized transfer with supporting bank records and correspondence. Patricia submitted a formal complaint to the Ohio Department of Job and Family Services, the office that handles adult protective services and elder financial abuse cases. She also sent a certified letter to David's attorney. Yes, he had one, which told me everything I needed to know about how long this had been planned, notifying him that the revocation was filed and that any further action related to my finances or property would result in immediate civil litigation. I also updated my will. This felt like the hardest thing, harder than the bank statements, harder than the attorney meetings, but I did it. Claire and I sat in Patricia's office on a Thursday afternoon, and I told Patricia exactly what I wanted, and she wrote it down, and I signed it, and this time I read every word first. All of it took 4 weeks. In that time, David called me 3 times. I answered twice, kept my voice even, said I was busy with the holidays, said I'd call him back. The 3rd time, I let it go to voicemail. He said he was worried about me. He said he loved me. I did not call him back. It was a Saturday in January when David came to the door unannounced. I'd expected this. Patricia had told me it might happen. I had my phone with me and Patricia's number ready, and I had asked Claire to stay in the study and say nothing, whatever happened. David knocked, and I opened the door. And he was alone, no Sandra. That surprised me. He looked tired. Or Perhaps he looked the way people look when they're doing the math and the numbers aren't adding up anymore. "Can I come in?" he said. "You can," I said, and I stepped back. We sat in the living room. He didn't take off his coat. He had his hands in his lap, and he looked at the floor, and then at me, and then at the floor again. I've sat with a lot of people in serious moments. I know what it looks like when someone is deciding what version of themselves to be. He said, "I got the letter from the attorney." "I know," I said. "Mom, David." My voice was quieter than I expected it to be. Not hard, just final. I spent 33 years keeping people alive who didn't want to die. I know when something is wrong. I should have known it sooner. That's on me, but I know it now. He opened his mouth. He said something about the money, that he'd needed it, that the business had gone badly 2 years ago and he hadn't wanted to worry me, that he'd meant to pay it back. He said Sandra's name and then stopped. He said he was sorry, and I believe, actually, that in that moment he was. People are sorry when consequences arrive. It doesn't always mean what it used to mean. I said, "The money is the smaller thing, David. Do you understand what you were trying to do? The house. The medical power of attorney. I've seen what happens to people when their families take control. I've watched it. I will not be that person." He didn't say anything for a while. The room was very quiet. Through the window, I could see the garden, bare and gray in January, the raised beds Robert built still holding their shape under the cold. "What happens now?" he said. "That depends on what the attorney's office recommends," I said. "I'm not going to the police today. I'm not making promises about next month. What I am going to tell you is that I am staying in this house. I am managing my own finances, and I am not confused, and I am not fragile, and I am not someone to be arranged like furniture while I'm still standing in the room." He left 20 minutes later. I stood at the window and watched his car pull out of the driveway and disappear down the street. Claire came out of the study and stood next to me, and we didn't say anything for a moment. "Are you okay?" she said finally. I thought about that. The honest answer was that I was and I wasn't, and that both of those things were true in different rooms of me, and I had enough experience with complicated answers to not try to simplify it. "I'm clear," I said. "That's enough for today. It's been 4 months since that Saturday. The civil case is still proceeding. Patricia says these things take time, and I have learned in 71 years that time is the one thing you cannot rush. The unauthorized transfers totaled $22,000 across 17 months. I won't pretend that number doesn't matter, it does. But it is a number, and numbers can be addressed. The other things are harder to put a value on. David and Sandra have not been in touch since the certified letters started. Part of me waits for some kind of communication that looks like accountability. Not an apology wrapped around an excuse, but something real. I don't know if it will come. Nurses also learn not to want the outcome so badly that they stop seeing the patient clearly. Claire calls every Sunday, still at 7. She has started calling on Thursdays too, since January. I've started calling her on Wednesdays just because. I still teach the memoir class at the senior center every Thursday. Last month, one of my students, a woman of 76 named Helen, who spent her career as a librarian, wrote about the year she learned that the people who are unkind to you are often not unkind to everyone, only to the people they think will absorb it quietly. It was one of the truest sentences I'd read in a long time. I told her so. I still tend the garden. The raised beds survived the winter. When April comes and the ground loosens up, I'll turn the soil, and if the tomatoes Robert planted come back, they have come back every year for 32 years. I will tend them the way I always have, carefully, with attention, without any guarantee of outcome. That is what care looks like. Not rescue, not control, presence, attention. The willingness to stay in the room. What happened with my son taught me something I should have already known. Love is not the same as trust, and trust must be earned in small, ordinary transactions over a long time before it can hold the weight of something real. I loved my son. I trusted him because I loved him, and I made those two things the same when they were not. I am 71 years old. I live alone in a house I own. I drive my own car. I manage my own accounts, and I read every statement front to back before I file it in the color-coded cabinet that Robert left me. I have a good attorney, a brilliant daughter, 11 students who are writing their lives down in composition notebooks on Thursday mornings, and a garden that has, so far, never lied to me. People ask me, when I tell this story, what the hardest moment was. They expect me to say the discovery, or the conversation with David, or the signing of the new will. But the hardest moment was the Tuesday evening after I'd spread all those bank records across the dining room table and filled 6 pages of the legal pad and finally understood everything I was looking at. The hardest moment was sitting in that chair and deciding what kind of person I was going to be next. I am still deciding, honestly. I think that's probably right. The moment you stop deciding is the moment you start being arranged. I kept the house. I kept the garden. I kept myself. That is what I know. That is enough.